heartened to lose Brett there. We're going to let him go. He's moving towards Rolling Fork, Mississippi, just to take a look at the damage and devastations there. You know, Stephen, I want to bring you in for a second, because when we're looking back at this storm, keep in mind this was a wedge tornado that could have been a half a mile to a mile wide at times. But he made such an interesting point. You could see something like this touch down on the Mississippi Delta and in fields and open areas, and it doesn't have that much of an impact. But the weather just doesn't have the knowledge, you know, of, hey, let's steer in this direction to miss a town. Unfortunately, the size of this, the intensity of this could have ruined some of these towns where they will have to be rebuilt, and Rolling Fork is included in that. And we were talking with Brett, Amy, over in Louisiana. He was in Lake Providence last night, just shortly before we had the sun go down, and you could see indications that this one storm was trying to get its act together, that before it moved over the Mississippi, Brett's eyes, they were on it, and this storm tracked once it crossed the river. I mean, we're looking at that devastation, and it's one of those times when you cover tornadoes on the ground, which our teams are there. It's one thing when you're dealing with a lower end tornado. Sometimes you have to look for the damage. It's a home or two. But then we have these types of storms. We have these types of tornadoes, and they are a different echelon. They're the type that storm trackers take a break from, because as they move upon a community, it's less about tracking the storm and it's about helping people. It's about looking at that property. It's the damage, it's the devastation, it's the catastrophe that sometimes Mother Nature brings in the form of very strong tornadoes. And while we won't give an indication or a rating of this system, it takes our minds back perhaps to Mayfield, Kentucky, which was a part of the deadliest tornado outbreak in Kentucky's history. And this is the unfortunate thing. I mean, when it comes to the damage and what we're looking at and what we've been observing for the past 24 hours, I know there was probably some indication early on, shortly before sunrise. Where's this video? Communication's been knocked out in Rolling Fork, just one community. I mean, and we've seen it elsewhere too. I look at these reports, really just two powerful storms, two supercells, the type that when we look at this as meteorologists, we warn for. We bring that significant risk up so often when we have a level 4 out of 5 threat like we did yesterday in a zone right here, right where we saw it. And that's what we're dealing with. Unfortunately, the threats that we continue to look at and what we're dealing with, we have so much to comb through. And it's just the beginnings here. And Brett Adair dealing with the most tragic and the worst type of loss, because there was loss of life. And you see these threats. The unfortunate thing when it comes to these tornado warnings, we had them in Tennessee. We had them in Arkansas. We had one down in southeastern Alabama. Parts of Mississippi, though, it is going to take a long time, initially just to survey, and volunteer efforts, of course, just beginning. So watching these threats unfold yesterday, and now as we look at the aftermath, that story is going to become the recovery, Amy, and the help that's necessary, and everyone mobilizing that can, from the federal government to the state to these local municipalities, all of them essential in this recovery because the people need the help desperately. Let's see if they're going to get it. We're going to talk right now to FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. She joins us over the phone right now. Deanne, we've got a crisis here in parts of Mississippi. The town of Rolling Fork is destroyed, just crushed. We're looking at the aerials that have come in from this tornado outbreak last night. I know you've been in touch with the governor. What will be the strategy for FEMA to interact with these states and towns that have been impacted by the tornadoes?
Good afternoon, Amy. Thanks so much for giving me a chance to give an update here. Yeah, I mean, I did speak with the governor this morning. I have also spoken with Congressman Thompson, and, you know, what we're seeing and hearing right now is widespread damage, right? I think you just heard about the fatalities and some missing, and we hope that there are not going to be additional fatalities. The state has really been working through the night and the morning to help get into these communities, and we have staff that are integrated in with the state, and we're going to work with the governor to get a disaster declaration request and process that for him as quickly as possible. But we are going to have our regional administrator on the ground tonight, and I'm planning to travel there either tomorrow or the next day so I can assess the impacts firsthand.
Deanne, you are familiar with serious situations, disasters, a 30-year career, a coast-to-coast situation, seeing just about everything you can see with different types of disaster situations. Looking at some of the footage and aerial shots that we have over several states, Mississippi perhaps being hit the hardest, but we've got Alabama and Tennessee in this as well. Some of these homes and some of this portion of rural America, these towns, have been taken right down to the slabs. As far as what they can expect for help, for support, I know that we got the medical crews heading in there. The Governor Reeves saying that he would get the medical crews in here. This could be a situation where we might have to have towns completely rebuilt. How does FEMA interact with those local communities to make that happen?
Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of those disasters that requires all of government and all of society to come in and help these communities. We know that some of these towns, Rolling Fork, are some of our more disadvantaged and impoverished communities that are out there. And we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can and bringing in all of the resources so the entire federal family is engaged, but also our non-governmental and our nonprofit organizations as well, because it's going to take all of us to help this community rebuild and recover. And so, again, we're going to work with the governor to understand what his immediate needs are, to help with any ongoing life-saving. That's our priority today, right, to make sure that there's no other life-saving, life-sustaining needs that have to happen. And then we will be bringing in, the resources and coordinating whatever is necessary to help these communities rebuild.
You'll not only be orchestrating that, I know you've seen it firsthand, 20 years serving with the National Guard there in Colorado. You've been on location with severe situations like this. Before we leave you, we have more severe weather ahead. We have areas in the South that have been, since Christmas, every single week, been under the threat of severe weather. What messaging would you give for personal responsibility and families to prepare for serious and severe weather like this?
Amy, such a good point to bring up, because as we're looking at the devastation that we saw come through last night, we are still in an active weather system. And so the most important thing that people can do is listen to the threats that are out there, listen to the weather forecast and how they're going to impact you, know how you're going to receive those emergency alerts, because sometimes when the weather spins up quickly, it can just be a matter of minutes before it hits you. So know how you're going to get that critical information and then what your actions are going to be so you can take cover quickly to protect your family. But the important thing right now is to stay vigilant until the threat of this severe weather passes through.
Thank you for taking the time for Fox Weather. Federal Emergency Management Director Deanne Criswell. Also, you know what? I'm not going to leave without saying, you know what? First woman to serve as the administrator in Women's History Month. It's really a beam and a spotlight to women everywhere, the work that you're doing and the hard work that it took to get there and be prepared for the situations that you're facing right now when America is in disaster. Thanks for taking the time for Fox Weather today.
Absolutely, Amy. Thank you for helping get the message out there.
The messaging is important.
Stephen, the setup here
is going to be continuing.
We've got a lot of work to do, but people are going to have to step up. And she says from the federal government all the way to individuals.